Mervyn Patel, the night manager of the Walmart in Oceanside, never thought he would be the one to discover 2 dead bodies in his store. He was just doing a routine check before closing at 23:30 when he noticed the door to one of the back rooms was ajar. Inside lay 2 bodies, women, one older, one younger, both wearing the uniforms of female store employees, both with bloody wounds. He recognized them immediately. Nisha Kamani, a cashier who had worked here for 5 years, and Aisha Kamani, a newcomer, the sister of one of the guards. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911. Detective Isaiah Dumbo arrived on the scene 20 minutes after the call. His shabby sedan pulled up next to police cars and an ambulance whose flashers painted the parking lot's nighttime asphalt red and blue. Dumbo had seen a lot in his 45 years, but each new murder still made his chest feel heavy. He entered the building and nodded to the patrolman, heading straight for the yellow tape that fenced off the entrance to the warehouse. The forensics team was already at work, methodically photographing and gathering evidence. "Dumbo," he showed his badge to the technician who led him inside. "What do we got?" "2 women," replied Shannon McCoya, the chief forensics officer on the scene, both dead from multiple stab wounds, apparently between 22:30 and 23 hours. Dumbo put on his gloves and walked cautiously to the back of the room. The bodies had already been marked, but not yet removed. He bent over them, scrutinizing them closely. The older woman was lying on her back, her eyes wide open, a look of horror on her face. The younger was on her side, as if trying to crawl away or defend herself. They were both wearing Walmart uniforms. "Have they been identified yet?" Dumbo asked. "Nisha and Aisha Kamani," Shannon replied. 37 and 24 years old. Troy Kamani's wife and sister. He also works here as a security guard. "Where is he now?" Staff room. Officer Banks is with him." Dumbo nodded and continued to survey the crime scene. The warehouse was filled with boxes of merchandise, but there was a small space in the center where the murder had taken place. There were signs of a struggle on the floor, drops of blood a few meters away from the bodies. The killer attacked here. The victims tried to run away or defend themselves. "Murder weapon?" "They haven't found it yet." Shannon shook her head. "But judging from the wounds, a knife with a blade of about 15 centimeters, probably a hunting knife." Dumbo walked over to a rack where he noticed a small surveillance camera. "Are the cameras working?" "They should. The techs have already requested the footage from security." The detective took another look at the crime scene, memorizing every detail. Then he went out to the sales floor, where the store employees were gathered. Some were crying, others just sat there with shocked faces. Troy Kamani stood out immediately, a tall, stout man with a short haircut and a hard stare. He sat apart from the others, face pressed into the palms of his hands. He wore the uniform of a store guard, slightly rumpled, as if he had slept in it. Dumbo walked over to him, introduced himself, and sat across from him. "Mr. Kamani, I'm very sorry for your loss," he began in the standard way. "But I need to ask you some questions." Troy raised his head. His eyes were red, but dry. "Are they really dead?" he asked in a muffled voice. "Both of them?" "Yes, I'm sorry." Dumbo nodded, watching the man's reaction carefully. "Can you tell me the last time you saw your wife and sister?" Troy clenched his fists. "Nisha was supposed to finish at 22. I clocked in at 14 and work until 22:30. We usually walk home together. Aisha, she was supposed to be in the electronics department until 21 today." "And you didn't see them after they finished work?" "No." Troy shook his head. "I was patrolling the East Wing. There was a problem with teenagers there. I thought Nisha was waiting for me in the break room as usual." "When did you notice your wife was missing?" "About 22:15. I finished my paperwork and went looking for her. I thought maybe she was in the bathroom or helping someone. Then I heard shouting and saw people running towards the warehouse." Dumbo wrote down the statement, noting a few details. Troy spoke smoothly, almost mechanically, and his emotions seemed muted for a man who had just lost his wife and sister. "What about Aisha?" When was the last time you spoke to her? This morning, Troy answered after a pause. She lives with us, renting a room. We had breakfast and went to work at different times. She had to get home before we did. What was your relationship with your wife like? Troy tensed up. Normal, like everybody else. There were fights, but nothing serious. And your sister? Aisha was always trouble. Drugs, bad boys. I tried to help her. That's why I got her a job here. I thought a steady job would help her get back on her feet. Dumbo made notes, noting how Troy spoke of his sister in the past tense, as if he'd already gotten used to the idea of her death, even though it had only been a couple hours. Where were you between 22 and 23 hours? Patrolling the store, filling out reports in the security room, Troy answered without hesitation. You can check the logs and the cameras. We will. Dumbo nodded. Do you have any idea who might have wanted to harm your wife or sister? Troy shook his head, then suddenly froze. Aisha had a drug problem. Maybe she owed someone. Or Nisha had gotten caught in the act when she'd tried to protect her. Dumbo noted how easy it was for Troy to build a theory without having all the facts. We'll check all possibilities, he said, ending the first debriefing. Please stay in touch. Do you have a place to stay tonight? Yes, I have a brother in Vista. I'll go to his place, Troy replied. I can't go back home, not now. Dumbo ended the conversation and moved on to the other employees. Most of them had little to say. They worked in other departments, had left earlier, or simply hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. But when the detective approached Lucas Tambwa, the young security guard who had been working with Troy on this shift, he looked around nervously before he began to speak. Detective, I don't know if this is important or not, but Troy's been acting strange today, he said quietly, taking Dumbo aside. Usually he's calm, methodical, always on schedule. Today he was fidgety, checking his cell phone constantly and leaving his post several times without warning. What time was that? Dumbo was worried. Starting at 20 o'clock, Lucas answered. And around 22 he disappeared for half an hour. I tried to contact him on the radio, but he didn't answer. Then he came back all sweaty and said he was chasing a shoplifter who'd run away. But you didn't believe him. We always report these things to each other, Lucas shrugged. And he should have made a note in the log, but he didn't. And also, he lowered his voice. Troy and Nisha haven't been on good terms. He's very jealous. And Nisha and Aisha had been spending a lot of time together lately, whispering all the time. Dumbo nodded gratefully and wrote down the statement. This information was already painting a very different picture than what Troy had presented. Shannon walked over to him, holding an evidence bag. Look what we found in the dumpster behind the store. She pointed to the guard's gloves, stained with something dark. Looks like blood, and it's the same size as the ones they give the guards here. Get them to forensics right away, Dumbo ordered, and see if any of the guards are missing a set of gloves. He returned to the crime scene, now paying particular attention to details that might link the murder to Troy. On the floor, under one of the shelving units, he noticed a small object, a button from a guard's uniform. Forensics carefully removed it and bagged it as evidence. Check Troy Kamani's uniform, Dumbo asked. See if there's a button torn off. The investigation continued through the night. By morning, the detective had enough evidence to start building a case. But what was missing was a motive. Why had Troy, if it was him, killed both his wife and sister? Dumbo went to the security room where the surveillance tapes were kept. The tech was already there waiting for him. We've gone through the footage from tonight, he said, pointing to the screen. Here's Nisha finishing her shift at 22 o'clock. Here's Aisha walking towards the warehouse at 21:30. And here's Nisha following her at 22:05. What about Troy? At 22:08, he passes the cell in the east wing and heads. Looks like he's heading toward the warehouse, too. But then we have a gap. What gap? Dumbo frowned. The technician spread his hands. There is no recording from the camera in the corridor leading to the warehouse, and the camera in the warehouse itself, from 22:10 to 22:45. Then the recording resumes, and all we see is Troy leaving the warehouse area at 22:47. Absent? Dumbo interjected. Why? It looks like a system failure, but it's strange that only these two cameras are affected and only for this period of time, replied the technician. I'd say someone intentionally deleted that part of the recording or interfered with the cameras. Dumbo gritted his teeth. It's not just evidence anymore. It's direct proof that the murder was planned, and whoever planned it had access to the surveillance system. Who would have that access? The head of security and his deputies, the technician answered, and the system administrator. Does Troy Kamani have that kind of access? No, he's just a security guard. But the technician hesitated. If he has the supervisor's password, technically he could log in. Dumbo nodded, making a note to check Troy's relationship with the security chief. He went through the available footage once more, pausing frames and taking in the faces of Nisha, Aisha, and Troy in their final hours. One of the shots showed Nisha and Aisha standing side by side in a retail space, discussing something. They stood close together, and Aisha's hand rested on Nisha's shoulder in a gesture that might have seemed merely friendly, but in the context of the information she had received from Lucas, it seemed more intimate. In another shot, Troy was watching them from a distance, his face tense, his hands clenched into fists. Dumbo felt the mosaic beginning to take shape, but key fragments were still missing. If Troy had indeed killed his wife and sister, what exactly had been the final straw? And how exactly had the murder occurred in the 35 minutes that were missing from the recording? He decided to test one more theory and turned to the technician. Can you show me the footage from the camera at the entrance to the surveillance room? I'm interested in the period from 22 to 23 hours. The technician quickly found the footage, and they saw Troy Kamani enter the surveillance room at 22:35 and leave 7 minutes later. He looked much more collected than when Dumbo had first seen him after the murder. That was a strong argument in favor of Troy being the one who deleted the tape. But why had he left the rest of the footage showing him heading toward the warehouse? Inexperience? Panic? Or was he so sure that he was in no danger without the main recording? Dumbo realized that the case was slowly turning into an investigation into not just a murder, but a premeditated and planned crime of jealousy. But to prove it, he would need hard evidence and, preferably, a surveillance tape, which was now missing. Is there any way to recover the deleted tape? He asked the technician. Maybe, he replied uncertainly. The system backs up to a separate server every 12 hours. If the deletion occurred after the last backup, it is theoretically possible to restore it. But that would require authorization from the store management and possibly a specialist. Dumbo nodded. That would be the next step in his investigation. He made a final notation in his notebook, looking at the screen where the image of Troy emerging from the surveillance room with an expression of grim determination on his face froze. The morning after the discovery of the bodies at Walmart was overcast. Isaiah Dumbo sat in his office, rubbing his tired eyes. He had stayed up all night gathering the first evidence and interviewing witnesses. The case folders he had requested on Troy, Nisha, and Aisha Kamani were now in front of him. The first thing the detective opened was the folder with the information on Troy. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. Troy Kamani was not the blameless citizen he wanted to appear to be. In 2010, he'd been arrested for assaulting an ex-girlfriend. The case was dropped when the victim withdrew her statement, but the police report clearly indicated Troy's violent and uncontrollable jealousy. Another arrest followed in 2015 for a bar fight where Troy broke the jaw of a man who he said was looking at his girlfriend inappropriately. He was then awarded community service and required to take an anger management course. Dumbo made notes in his notebook. The picture was not a pleasant one. Troy was prone to violence, especially when it came to the women in his life. But almost 10 years had passed between the incident at the bar and the current crime with no recorded offenses. What changed? What made him snap now? Nishi Kamani's file was much thinner. Clean record, no trouble with the law. She'd worked at Walmart for the last 5 years, Before that, she was a cashier at a grocery store across town. Married to Troy Kimani for the past 7 years. No children. Aisha Kimani, on the other hand, has had a history of trouble with the law. 2 priors for drug possession, 1 for petty theft. Her last arrest was just 6 months ago, but the case was dismissed for lack of evidence. She'd only worked at Walmart for 2 months. Dumbo leaned back in his chair, piecing together the disparate facts. Troy is a security guard with a history of jealous violence. Nisha is his wife, a regular store employee. Aisha is Troy's troubled sister with a drug past. All 3 had something in common, and that something led to a double homicide. The phone on Dumbo's desk rang, interrupting his musings. "Dumbo," he answered. "Detective, this is Shannon from the crime lab. I have preliminary results on the gloves found in the dumpster." "I'm listening." "They have blood on them from both victims, and there's traces of sweat inside that are highly likely to belong to Troy Kimani. We've requested a warrant for a DNA sample for comparison." "Great." Dumbo made another note. "Anything else?" "Yeah. Forensics found traces of skin under both victims' fingernails, especially a lot on Aisha. Looks like she fought back desperately. If it's the killer's skin, we'll have direct DNA evidence." "Keep me posted," Dumbo said, and hung up. The next step was to visit Kimani's house. The modest 1-story house in Oceanside's working-class neighborhood didn't stand out from its neighbors. Police tape fenced off the property, and a patrolman was on duty at the entrance. "Forensics done yet?" Dumbo asked. "Yes, sir. They finished last night and sealed the house." Dumbo put on his gloves and went inside. The house was neat, though modestly furnished. The living room had a shabby couch and TV, and there were several pictures of the family on the walls. In one of them, Troy had his arm around Nisha, both of them smiling. In the other, a more recent one, they stood with tense faces, keeping their distance from each other. Dumbo made his way to the bedroom. The double bed was made up, books and phone chargers on the bedside tables. The closet was neatly hung with clothes, male and female. Nothing indicated trouble. The adjoining room belonged to Aisha. It was a creative mess. Clothes strewn about, makeup on the dressing table, band posters on the walls. Dumbo methodically looked around the room, peering into drawers and closets. In one of the drawers, he found a bag of white powder. "Bingo," he muttered, carefully packing the find into an evidence bag. But the real find was waiting for him in the bathroom. In the laundry basket, under a stack of towels, he found a man's shirt with what looked like blood. The shirt was crumpled and hidden, as if someone had meant to dispose of it, but hadn't had time or had forgotten. Finished with the house, Dumbo went to interview the neighbors. Most of them described Kimani's family as quiet, decent people. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Work hard, always say hello," were the standard phrases the detective heard after every such crime. But the elderly woman who lived across the street gave a more interesting testimony. "They've been fighting a lot lately," Mrs. Ngozi said as she poured Dumbo some tea. "The walls are thin, you can hear everything. He shouted at her, accused her of cheating on him. And when that girl, his sister, moved in, it got worse." "What do you mean, worse?" Dumbo clarified, taking a sip of the too-sweet tea. "She was strange, that Aisha. Men came to see her when Troy wasn't home. All sorts. And 2 weeks ago, I saw Nisha crying on the porch and Troy yelling at her for embarrassing him. Do you have any idea what that particular conflict was about?" Mrs. Ngozi shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know exactly, but I heard him shouting something like, 'I know everything. Do you think I'm blind?' And then something about his sister." Dumbo thanked the woman and continued making the rounds of the neighbors. Another neighbor, a young man with dreadlocks, said he had seen Nisha and Aisha walking home together several times, holding hands like teenagers. "They were laughing and whispering," he said. "One time I saw them hugging right on the porch. Pretty intimate, you know. Not the way relatives usually hug." After interviewing neighbors, Dumbo went back to the station and contacted Walmart's head of security. "I want all the camera footage from the last month that shows interactions between Nisha and Aisha Kimani and between them and Troy Kimani, he said. It took several hours to review the tapes. Most of them showed nothing out of the ordinary. Nisha working behind the cash register, Aisha handling merchandise in the electronics department, Troy patrolling the sales floor. But on a few of the recordings, Dumbo noticed what he was looking for. Moments when Nisha and Aisha met on the sales floor or in the staff corridors. On one of the recordings, dated last week, they met in an empty hallway. Aisha pressed Nisha against the wall and kissed her on the lips. The kiss was brief, but unequivocally romantic. Afterward, they quickly separated, looking around. Another tape from 3 days ago showed Troy watching them from behind a shelving unit, his face contorted with a grimace of rage. Dumbo turned off the tape and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The motive was becoming clearer. Troy had discovered that his wife and sister were in a romantic relationship. For a man with his history of jealousy and violence, that might have been the last straw. The question remained, was the murder premeditated, or had it happened in a fit of rage? The missing surveillance tape pointed to the former, but Dumbo needed more proof. His next stop was Walmart's Human Resources Department, where he requested the personnel files of all three. In Aisha's personnel file, he found several complaints from male co-workers accusing her of inappropriate behavior and sexual harassment. All of the complaints had been filed within the first month of her employment and then withdrawn. Dumbo called one of those men, Kevin Matibi, and arranged a meeting. Matibi, a nervous young man of about 25, agreed to talk only after the detective assured him that the conversation would remain confidential. Aisha was very straightforward, Matibi said, staring into his coffee. She started flirting with me the first day, even though she knew I was married. Invited me to her house, told me my brother wouldn't be there. I refused, but she was persistent. Why did you withdraw the complaint? Dumbo asked. Matibi wrinkled his nose. She said no one would believe that I didn't mean to anyway. That she would tell my wife as if I had molested her myself. I have 2 children, detective. I couldn't risk it. Do you know any other men she was involved with? I know she was involved with Jabari from the sporting goods department and Tyrone from auto parts, both married, but she didn't force them. They wanted it. What about Nisha, Troy's wife? Matibi raised his eyebrows in surprise. Nisha? No, I haven't heard anything like that. She always seemed a decent woman, calm. Dumbo thanked Matibi and let him go. Pondering the information, Aisha Kimani loomed as someone who liked to play with fire, seducing married men, perhaps using it to manipulate them. And now it seems she's seduced her brother's wife. Back at the station, Dumbo got new forensic results. The DNA on the shirt found in the house was Troy's, and the blood on it was both victims'. Skin samples from under the victim's fingernails were also highly likely to be Troy's, although a direct sample of his DNA was needed for final confirmation. Dumbo requested an arrest warrant for Troy Kimani. There was enough evidence to hold him for 72 hours while they awaited final forensic results. The arrest went unopposed. Troy opened the door to his brother's house, and when he saw the detective with the patrolman, he simply nodded as if he expected it. Did you find the man who killed my wife and sister? He asked in a lifeless voice. Troy Kimani, you are under arrest on suspicion of murdering Nisha and Aisha Kimani, Dumbo replied as he read him his license. At the station, Troy refused to have a lawyer, saying he had nothing to hide. During the interrogation, he remained calm, denying all charges. I loved my wife, he said, and I took care of my sister despite her problems. Why would I kill them? Because you found out about their relationship, Dumbo replied, watching Troy's reaction. For a moment, the mask of calm slipped from the suspect's face, and fury flashed in his eyes, but he quickly pulled himself together. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. We have the security footage, Troy. We know that Nisha and Aisha were more than just related. Troy gritted his teeth, but didn't say anything. And we have your shirt with traces of both victims' blood, gloves with your sweat and their blood, Your DNA under their fingernails. You were there, Troy. You killed them. I want a lawyer, Troy finally said. Dumbo interrupted the interrogation and sent Troy to a cell to await the arrival of a public defender. The evidence was strong, but still circumstantial. Something was needed to definitively link Troy to the murder. The answer came unexpectedly. Forensics, who were looking into the victim's cell phones, sent over a report. Nisha's phone was password locked, but forensics was able to crack it. In the messages, they found correspondence between Nisha and Aisha going back 2 months. Dumbo went through the messages, and the picture became crystal clear. Aisha had started flirting with Nisha practically from the moment she moved into their home. Nisha had resisted at first, writing that she loved Troy, that it was wrong. But gradually, the tone of her messages changed. She complained that Troy didn't understand her, that he was too controlling, too jealous. A month ago, the messages included declarations of love. 2 weeks ago, discussions of how they could leave together, start a new life without Troy. The last exchange of messages occurred on the day of the murder. Aisha: meet me at the warehouse after your shift. No one will be there. Nisha: dangerous. What if Troy notices? Aisha: he's busy in the East Wing. We'll have some time. I miss you. Nisha: okay, I'll be there at 22:05. Dumbo put the phone away. Now everything was falling into place. Aisha had made an appointment for Nisha to meet her in the storage room. They didn't know that Troy already suspected their connection. Perhaps he had seen the messages or just noticed their behavior. That evening, he followed them to the warehouse, found them together, and in a fit of rage, he killed them both. Then, realizing what he'd done, he tried to cover his tracks, deleted the camera footage, threw away the gloves, hid the bloody shirt. Dumbo now had a complete picture of what had happened and irrefutable evidence of motive. Nishi's phone was the final nail in Troy Kamani's coffin. Dumbo put together all the materials for the prosecutor, in no doubt that Troy would be charged with first-degree murder. A double murder motivated by jealousy, with an attempt to hide evidence. The jury would show no leniency. Rereading the messages between Nisha and Aisha, the detective couldn't help but think about the small decisions that led to this tragedy. What if Aisha hadn't moved in with her brother and his wife? What if Nisha had rejected her advances? What if Troy had been able to control his jealousy? But the story went exactly as it went, and now 3 lives were ruined, 2 cut short by violent death, and the 3rd would end in prison. Dumbo closed the case file and leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, the rain was beginning to fall, drumming on the glass as if trying to wash away everything that had happened. But some stains no rain can get out. Isaiah Dumbo sat in his office, looking at the stack of documents on the Kamani case. 3 days had passed since Troy's arrest, and the case seemed all but closed. There was more than enough evidence for a conviction. But something was bugging the detective. He wanted to be absolutely sure, wanted to see for himself exactly what had happened in the Walmart warehouse that fateful evening. A phone call interrupted his musings. "Detective Dumbo," he answered. "Detective, this is Carlos Montoya from Walmart's maintenance department." A young voice answered the phone. "I hear you're looking for a way to recover the deleted security footage." Dumbo straightened up. "Yes, that's right. Do you have any suggestions?" "Maybe. I'm working on a new backup system for the entire store chain. We're using cloud storage where copies of all records are automatically uploaded. Even if someone deletes them from the local system, they're still in the cloud." "And this system was up and running the night of the murder?" "We've been testing it for the last 2 months at several stores, including the one where the murder took place. I can't guarantee that the footage has been saved, but there's a good chance." "I need to see those tapes as soon as possible," Dumbo said, feeling his pulse quicken at the possibility of direct evidence. "There's a problem," Carlos replied. "The system hasn't been officially implemented yet, and I need authorization from management to access the test data, plus a court order from you." "I'll have the warrant in an hour," Dumbo assured him. "And the authorization?" "I've already spoken to the CIO. He's willing to cooperate, but asks that all requests be formalized. Got it. Send me the necessary forms, and I'll prepare the documents for the judge. After he finished talking, Dumbo immediately contacted the district attorney. He was lucky. Judge Patricia Nkomo was free and agreed to consider the request for an emergency warrant. 3 hours later, all the formalities were settled, and the detective met Carlos Montoya at Walmart's main office. A young technician with a bushy beard and intelligent eyes escorted him to a server room where several monitors showed various parts of the security system. I've already started the search, Carlos said, typing rapidly on his keyboard. We need the footage from cameras 5 and 6. That's the corridor and the warehouse, from 22:10 to 22:45, right? Exactly, Dumbo confirmed, tapping his fingers nervously on the desk. Carlos worked in silence for several minutes, going from one system to another, entering passwords and commands. Finally, he leaned back in his chair with a triumphant smile. Got it, he exclaimed. The records were saved in the cloud storage. The system was working properly. Can you show them to me? Dumbo felt his heart beat faster. Sure. Carlos pressed a few keys, and a large monitor displayed an image of an empty corridor. The digital clock in the corner showed 22 hours and 10 minutes. Here, starting from when the records were deleted from the local system. They watched in tense silence. For the first 5 minutes, nothing happened in the hallway. Then, at 22:15, Aisha Kimani appeared. She walked quickly down the corridor and entered the storage room, glancing nervously over her shoulder. 3 minutes later, Nisha appeared. She was equally cautious, stopping and looking around several times before opening the warehouse door and slipping inside. Switch to the camera inside the warehouse, Dumbo asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. Carlos switched the view, and they saw Aisha waiting between the tall racks. When Nisha walked in, the younger woman rushed to her and hugged her tightly. They began kissing, gently at first, then more and more passionately. Aisha's hands slipped under Nisha's blouse. Scroll forward, Dumbo said, uncomfortable with the awkwardness of watching these intimate moments. Carlos sped up the tape, and they watched the women continue their encounter, unaware of what was about to happen. At 20:27, the tape switched back to normal speed as Troy Kimani appeared on the screen, quietly entering the storage room. His face was contorted with rage. In his hand he held a knife, a large hunting knife, with a blade about 15 centimeters long. Troy stopped, looking at the two women who still hadn't noticed his presence. They were half undressed, completely engrossed in each other. For a few seconds, Troy just stood there, shaking with rage. Then he took a step forward and uttered a single word, but even without the sound, Dumbo could read his lips. Suki. Nisha noticed him first. Her face contorted in horror. She pushed Aisha away and tried to cover herself. Aisha turned around, saw her brother with the knife, and froze. What happened next was swift and violent. Troy rushed forward. Aisha tried to run away, but he grabbed her by the hair and yanked her back with force. The knife rose and fell once, a second, a third time. Nisha struggled, clawing at his hands, his face, but quickly weakened. Aisha tried to stop her brother, lunged at him from behind, pounding her fists and screaming. He shoved her away, and she fell on top of the boxes. Troy let go of Nisha's already lifeless body and moved towards his sister. Aisha tried to crawl away, begging, her lips moving in pleading, though the camera didn't record the sound. Troy was relentless. He grabbed her by the throat with one hand, and with the other he stabbed her several times in the chest and stomach. Aisha fought back desperately, clawing at his hands and face, but gradually her movements became weaker and weaker. When both women stopped moving, Troy, as if waking up from a nightmare, looked around. He saw his hands covered in blood, looked at the bodies lying there. His face reflected horror. He fell to his knees, holding his head with his hands, and just rocked back and forth for a few minutes. Then, as if making a decision, he stood up and began to methodically cover his tracks. He took off the guard's gloves, which were covered in blood, wiped the knife on his shirt. Then he went out, but soon returned with a garbage bag where he put the gloves and the knife. At 22:43, Troy took one last look at the crime scene and walked out, carefully closing the door behind him. Dumbo and Carlos sat in silence, stunned by what they had seen. The tapes left no doubt. Troy Kamani had murdered his wife and sister in cold blood, catching them in an intimate moment. "I want copies of those tapes," Dumbo finally said. "For the court." "Of course," Carlos nodded, still pale from what he had seen. "I'll make the necessary arrangements." With the recovered records in hand, Dumbo returned to the station, ready to conduct a final interrogation of Troy Kamani. He had already been in a holding cell for 3 days, refusing to testify without a lawyer. Now the detective had irrefutable proof of his guilt. Before the interrogation, Shannon McCoya approached Dumbo, holding a folder of forensic results. "The final results of the DNA test," she said. "The skin samples under the fingernails of both victims are a perfect match to Troy Kamani's DNA, and traces of blood and tissue from both women were found under Troy's fingernails. He definitely made physical contact with them before he died." "Thank you." Dumbo nodded. It was another nail in his coffin. The interrogation room was small and stuffy. Troy Kamani sat at a table, handcuffed. Next to him was the public defender, a young man with tired eyes. Dumbo walked in, sat down across from them, and placed the evidence folder on the table. "Mr. Kamani," he began, "we have the results of the DNA forensics. Your DNA was found under the fingernails of both victims. It proves unequivocally that you had physical contact with them shortly before their deaths." Troy didn't answer, looking down at the table. "In addition," Dumbo continued, "we found a shirt with traces of both victims' blood in your house. You tried to hide it, but you didn't have time to get rid of it completely." The lawyer leaned over to Troy and whispered something in his ear. He shook his head. "But most importantly," Dumbo pulled a disc from a folder, "we recovered the deleted surveillance tape, the one you tried to destroy." At those words, Troy flinched and looked up at the detective for the first time. "Yes, Mr. Kamani," Dumbo nodded. "The tape is in the cloud storage. It shows everything from the moment you entered the warehouse to the moment you walked out, leaving behind 2 dead bodies." Troy's face contorted as if the mask had cracked. Tears welled up in his eyes. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "My client won't say anything," the lawyer intervened, but Troy shook his head. "No, I want to tell," he said. "I want everyone to know what really happened." Dumbo turned on the recorder and nodded. "I'm listening, Mr. Kamani." Troy took a deep breath. "I've suspected for weeks now. They started acting strange, whispering all the time, laughing together. Nisha started refusing me intimacy, saying she was tired or had a headache. And when I checked her phone, there were these messages from Aisha." He stopped talking, clenching his fists. "I couldn't believe it. My wife and my sister. How could they do this to me?" "And you decided to kill them?" Dumbo asked. "No," Troy exclaimed. "I mean, I didn't plan it. I wanted to talk to them, to work things out. I saw them exchanging messages at work that day. I noticed Aisha walk off in the direction of the warehouse, and then Nisha followed her. I followed them. I had a knife. I always carry it with me for protection. It's a rough neighborhood." Troy fell silent, gathering his thoughts. "When I opened the warehouse door and I saw them, they were kissing. His voice shook. Something inside me broke. I remember screaming, rushing forward. And then it's all a blur. I remember the blood and the screaming, but it's like it wasn't me, like I was watching from the sidelines." "You killed them in a state of passion?" Dumbo clarified. "Is that your theory?" "I don't know what it's called," Troy shook his head. "All I know is that when I came to, they were both dead, and I was standing over them with a knife in my hand. I panicked, tried to cover my tracks, deleted the security footage, thought I could get away with it." "But why didn't you get rid of the shirt and the knife?" "I was going to. I hid the shirt at home, planned to burn it the next day, and I threw the knife in the river on the way home." but I didn't get rid of the shirt in time. You found the bodies too quickly." Dumbo wrote down the statement, feeling strangely devastated. Troy's version of passion might have helped him avoid capital punishment, but it didn't change the fact that he had killed 2 women. "Do you regret what you did?" the detective asked. Troy was silent for a long time, staring into the space in front of him. "I regret losing control," he finally answered. "I regret letting my anger get the best of me. But when I think of them together, part of me still feels that they betrayed me, humiliated me in the worst way. My own sister seduced my wife. The tape shows that it was Nisha rather than Aisha who initiated it," Dumbo remarked as he watched Troy's reaction. "It doesn't matter who started it," Troy exclaimed, slamming his fist on the table. "They both betrayed me. They deserved—" He stopped talking abruptly, realizing what he had said. The lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to calm down. "I think that's enough for today," the defense attorney said. "My client is tired and upset. We are willing to cooperate with the investigation, but we need time to discuss further defense strategy." Dumbo nodded and turned off the recorder. He had a confession. He had evidence. The case was closed. "Take the prisoner out," he said to the guard at the door. As Troy was being led out of the room, he stopped suddenly and turned to the detective. "Have you ever loved so much that it hurt?" he asked. "So much that the thought of betrayal drove you crazy?" Dumbo didn't answer, but something flashed in his eyes. Perhaps understanding, perhaps pity. Troy nodded, as if he had gotten an answer, and allowed the guard to lead himself away. That evening, Dumbo sat in his office, filling out the last of the case reports. It was pouring rain outside the window, the reflections of the streetlights shaking in the puddles on the pavement. The detective thought about how one fateful encounter in a Walmart warehouse had led to the destruction of 3 lives. In front of him lay a picture of Troy, Nisha, and Aisha, taken a few months ago at a neighbor's barbecue. They were smiling, hugging each other, looking happy. Who could have imagined that beneath those smiles, a triangle of passion, betrayal, and jealousy was already brewing that would culminate in a double murder? Dumbo closed the folder and put the photograph away. Tomorrow, he would hand all the files over to the prosecutor, and the machinery of justice would continue its work. Troy Kamani would probably spend the rest of his life in prison. Nisha and Aisha are buried. The story was over. But the detective knew he would look back on the case for a long time to come, wondering, could the tragedy have been prevented? Was there a moment when someone could have stepped in and changed the course of events? Or were human passions, love, jealousy, betrayal, too strong to be controlled? He turned off the light in his office and headed for the exit. In the hallway, he met a young officer leading Troy Kamani into a transport for transportation to the county jail. Their gazes met for a moment. There was no more rage in Troy's eyes, only the emptiness of a man who had lost everything. Detective Dumbo stepped out into the rain, turned up the collar of his jacket, and headed for his car. The case was closed. Justice had been served, if it could be called that. But the heaviness in his chest didn't go away. Perhaps it would never go away. That's the price one pays when confronted with the darkest sides of human nature. Tomorrow will be a new day, a new case, new victims and perpetrators. The circle will close and begin again. And the story of Troy, Nisha, and Aisha Kamani will be another sad reminder of how easily love can turn into hate and passion into violence.